Hello again, guys. We are now in lesson 12.4, and we are going to be using corresponding parts of congruent triangles to solve all kinds of problems. And this is really useful application math because you're going to encounter situations like this in the lesson today where it's been used for many years by some really smart guys way back when mathematic constructions were pretty basic, and it was used to solve some pretty hard problems. So go ahead, read through this, make sure it makes sense, and then work through the first section of the lesson, and I will meet you for the got it. So here in the got it for the first section, we have two things given to us. That we have congruent sides here, and then we're trying to prove that angle C is equal to angle E. Now that's difficult because angle C is up here and angle E is over here, and we don't yet know that the triangles are congruent. So see if you can figure out a way that we can show the triangles to be congruent, which would then let me know that angle C was congruent to angle E. So my two angles here that meet at A, angles CAB and angles EAD, are vertical to each other, so they are congruent. From there, based on angle side or side angle side, excuse me about that, we know the triangles are congruent, and then corresponding parts of congruent triangles are always congruent, so therefore C must be congruent to E. So here in this little bonus question, not in Pearson, but it is in your notes, we want to look at why are these two triangles congruent to each other, and then we want to list all the other congruent or corresponding parts which are then also congruent. And be careful, looks can be deceiving, so pause the video. The direction with which these are oriented can be deceiving. You got to be careful. Since my two ticks on the congruent sides are facing each other, then these two angles are congruent to each other. Angles K and angle O are congruent, and then the sides. Work through the second module on the Pearson lesson, dealing with what I showed you there in the beginning, and then come back to me for the got it after you've given it a shot. So pause the video until you try this got it. Alright, first thing you should have noticed is since we have the midpoint here, that then splits my segments into two congruent segments. So BM is then congruent to MC by the definition of the midpoint, and by our reflexive property, AM is congruent to itself. Based off of that, we can know that these triangles are congruent based off of side, 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 and from there we then know that angle AMB is congruent to angle AMC because of corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Because this lesson was so short, I've got a couple extra practice problems for you. So go ahead and prove that angle M is congruent to angle R. At least think through the proof before you come back here. So pause the video. Most important part here is that reflexive property, able to make us prove the triangles congruent by side, 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 and from there they're just corresponding parts. So here we have a stringed instrument pronounced a balalika, and you want to look at these as two different triangles because the bases of the guitars are triangles, and prove that the bases are congruent. So you want to prove that KA is congruent to JY. So pause the video and give that a shot. So if we think through everything given to us here, we have angles R and N congruent, angles A and Y congruent, and sides RA and NY congruent to each other. So we can see here that we have two angles and the included side. So what property or what words would go in here to correctly solve? So what we now see is the two triangles are congruent based off of this angle-side angle relationship that they have. Because of that congruency, we now have corresponding parts that are congruent based off congruent triangles. Because that lesson was so brief, we're going to have just a little bit more review. So go ahead on 4 and 5 and name the postulate or theorem that shows us these triangles are congruent. Both of these triangles end up utilizing our reflexive property. In 4, we use it to then solve or prove our congruence by side, angle, side. And in 5, we use it to prove our congruence by side, side, side. Alright, these are the last problems for this video. So in 6, take a moment to ponder, how does the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent relate to the definition of congruent triangles? And then in 7, try to find the mistake in that proof. So come back to get the answers for both of these. So when we write this definition, or not the definition, but when we write this phrase, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, it's really just a short version of our definition. And in our proof for 7, the mistake comes in when we're trying to prove the triangle is congruent. They say it's angle side angle. It is actually angle angle side. You got to pay attention to the order in which it happens. That is all I have for you guys in this lesson, so please make sure you've worked through everything and that it all makes sense. And then if you need anything, let me know. Other than that, I will see you guys in class.